Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Gonna kick off the week. Bad weekend. Shootings all about Austin, Kenosha. Go around the country shooting after shooting. I mean, just started the week off bad note. And, as we ended last week, can we just have a couple of days where people aren't shooting each other? Can we just, I know. Not the guns. It's not the guns. And look, there's part of me goes, no, it's not the guns. It's the fact that we've got all of these now pressures popping up. We've got all of this stuff going on and all of this division and all of this chaos. Because we don't talk to each other anymore. We yell. And then some good news. Look, then I got some good news. And I was thrilled with the good news. Joe Manchin. And good on Joe Manchin for coming out and saying he is going to co-sponsor the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act, which is something I've been calling for that we desperately need. Now, understand, I don't think this is, don't get confused. This isn't a monumental step, I think, for Joe Manchin. Because look, the UMWA is still, the United Mine Workers Union of America, still a big union in West Virginia. A lot of history, a lot of memories, a lot of good feelings there. There's no way Joe Manchin couldn't sign on to this. So now coming out and saying, yep, I'm gonna do this. It's gonna help. It's gonna, yeah. Look, agreed. Biggest, most significant expansion of workers' rights in 86 years since the Wagner Act was passed in 1935. This is, to steal a Joe Biden line, a BFD, if it could get passed. And that's the thing that gets me. If Joe Manchin's not going to do anything on the filibuster, this act today of coming out and saying, well, I'm going to now put my name on the PRO Act was just a stunt. Because without some movement on the filibuster, it's going nowhere. Now, the hope becomes now, regardless, is that we, the rest of us, we the people, say it's time. We want definite, major, comprehensive labor law reform because this could help bring us back together. This could be the thing that does it. The other good news, and this was a bigger deal for me than Joe Manchin coming out and saying he's going to support the PRO Act. This was a bigger deal. The United Mine Workers of America, they announced today that they're going to get behind Joe Biden's green policies. Now, my first thought clearly was, I think you should have done that about 6 years ago. When Hillary said almost the exact same thing, we're going to have to give up these coal jobs and move towards a more green economy. We'll bring those jobs here and bring that green technology here. I guess they didn't believe her. But now Cecil Roberts and the UMWA are coming out and saying, look, we got nothing left to lose. The coal companies are going belly up. They're all going broke. They're all screwing over the union. They're all screwing over their workers. It's probably now end of the road. And you're going, look, we want the allocation of some of those training funds. We want to bring those good jobs to the places where these miners work. And that, truthfully, was the plan all along. You have to have a just transition. And that's something we haven't done in this country in ever. And it sounds like a good time to start now. You think about all the jobs that were lost through deindustrialization. And we were told they were going to be replaced by good, family-sustaining office jobs. We were all going to go to corner office, all wear a nice suit and tie. We were all going to have people that we could order around. It was going to be fabulous. Problem is, that didn't materialize. And we end up in this weird kind of spot where wages have been stagnant for 40 years. The standard of living in this country for most working Americans is declining. And we haven't done enough through our federal government to mandate that the business roundtable and the oligarchs here in the U.S. who have destroyed what was the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization actually clean up their own mess. But this is a good start. This is finally an administration saying we're going to move towards renewable energies. We're going to move to a more green economy. We're going to move to a more just economy. And now you've got the UMWA coming on. To me, that's a big deal. Now, understand, the UMWA at its height was 800,000 members. They're down to about 80,000 now. So this is going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Could be a hard sell because remember, those folks in West Virginia who voted overwhelmingly for Trump hated Hillary, misogyny, hated the black guy before, racism, and the black woman now, more racism. Going to be a tough sell for them. And look, I think Cecil Roberts is an incredible speaker. I think he's a great labor leader. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough sell. And this is where Biden has to put the money where the mouth is. Because, again, the green is the color that I still think matters. You give people good jobs. You give them opportunities. You give them a chance to support their families. I think things turn around. I really do. I think this is how we do it. And what brings me to this is today I had this weird conversation about if I thought economics had anything to do with the rash of violence we've been seeing lately and all this chaos going on. And yes, I mean, they didn't even get the question out. And I'm like, well, duh, yeah. If you don't have a career path that's going to make your life better, if you don't have the ability to support your family and you're not constantly struggling and tensed and crazy, of course you're going to have something to live for. That's something we should be striving for. And, I got into this weird discussion in, the workplace is one of those places that diversity happens. And I've talked about my experience over the years with a wide variety of things that have come up from the LGBTQ and the transgender stuff to, just outright, white nationalist, conservatives in the workplace and how you have to deal with them and how you figure out how to, make the workplace functional because you don't have much of a choice. It's not one of those things you can go, oh, I've changed my mind. I'm just going to go away. And, economics is one of those things that I think can tap down some of the tensions. Look, as the pandemic winds down and as we get maybe to the other side and maybe we start reopening, we start seeing a lot of the pressures that haven't really slammed home yet. We still have in a lot of places a moratorium on kicking people out of their homes. We still have a lot of unemployment money that's going around. So we're still teetering. And I know a lot of people go, "Wow, the economy's doing much better. Wall Street's great. Look at the stock market. Oh my gosh." Yeah, the stock market isn't the economy. The economy is, Joe and Jane and Bob and Susie not being able to put food on the table. And this is where, I keep coming back to this moment where we can, with the right policies, with the right choices, we can do what FDR did and not just save capitalism, but save democracy itself because we're literally ripping each other apart at the shreds. You look at all these mass shootings, you look at the police state that we're living in right now. It's crazy. And something's got to pull people back from the brink. And I always say that, when you have hope and opportunity, when there's a chance to lead a better life, when there's a chance to work hard, play by the rules, get ahead, people are going to grab it every time. Because we all want to be happy. And understand, we have and I think it's part of our DNA that we want to be happy. We have the right to pursue happiness. But I think a lot of us think we have the right to be happy. It's the pursuit. And this is where, there's nothing guaranteed in any of this, which is why we have to strive to be better and strive to work harder and strive to have policies that do the things we wanted to do. And part of the conversation around the economics was the Amazon unionization effort. The workers at Amazon trying to join a union. And look, I don't care what the organizers at Amazon did. I don't care what the RWDSU did. I don't care what any super organizer, because right now they're pitting organizers against each other. There is nothing that any of them could have done to change that vote, in my view, because the laws are so badly stacked against the workers. It's always my view. The laws are so stacked. So much power in the hands of corporate America. And that needs to be taken on. But I started reading some of the stories, and we were talking about, the fact that, the workers wanted guarantees. And I'm going, there are no guarantees in anything. So I had someone, this person that I was talking to, say, well, what guarantees do the unions give? And none. The unions don't guarantee you anything. They guarantee you the opportunity to sit down across from the boss and negotiate as one unit. We hear this all the time. People go, well, I'll make my own deals. You make your own bad deals. You're not going to go sit down at Amazon across from Jeff Bezos and go, you know what? That $15 an hour, that just ain't cutting. I want 16. And he'll go, okay, that's never going to happen. But collectively, the 5,000 of you with a committee of representatives saying, we're not moving another thing in this warehouse until we get 20. You got a shot. And this comes back to, again, my belief that we've gotten so far away from what unions have done and what collective bargaining has done over the decades that I don't think people know. And this led me into this discussion where, this guy I was talking to really believed he was going to go in and make his deal. He really thought he was going to be able to go in and sit down with the manager and say, well, I don't think that's enough. I think I would like this. And what's interesting is those folks who, and I used to never complain about those people because they usually went in and they usually made a bad deal. But they were happy because, hey, I made my own, even though it pulled everybody else down. We are now in an environment where this brainiac is pulling everyone down. And what's happened is we've been divided at the workplace. The old Jay Gould, I could pay half the working class to murder the other half. We're doing that in just not even halves. We've splintered ourselves into multiple factions that are eating each other. And as I said, in the workplace, much like when you were in school, you had to figure out how to get along. You had to figure out how to get along with the person you didn't necessarily like, you didn't want to be around, but you had to figure out how to be in that space, to interact with people you disagree with, and to try and find some balance, some common ground. And what's happened is all of that workplace interaction has gone away. And what you have this idea that, it's all about me, the individual. It's just me. And this idea of making things better for everyone has kind of gone away. We're now living fully in the Reagan view of it's all about the individual, hooray for me and the heck with everyone else. And then you wonder why we don't get things like labor laws that help protect workers who want to join and form unions, who want to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. Then you wonder. And then you wonder why, because we don't have laws to protect workers to organize, why we get in this situation where wages and inequality are massively unequal, and we've had wage stagnation for more than 40 years. You then start to wonder. And then we lose power, and we lose the opportunity to do better, and hopelessness. And it's this snowball effect that has put us in this bizarre space that I never thought we would be in. When I started working, and it was always about, this is how we're going to make lives better. Sadly, it's trapping people in cycles of poverty. And it is the economy, stupid. And I keep coming back to that. And it is the policy that comes out from the people in Washington and in Harrisburg, which is why the wealth class spends so much money demonizing and destroying. Now, look, I talk well of government because I don't have another option. I don't. There isn't another option out there. Corporate America, even the right wing now is losing their mind. Even the right wing is apoplectic at how corporate America has screwed things up. Our 200 oligarchs in the Business Roundtable have screwed this country up almost irreparably. And we didn't elect one of them. The reason I'm a supporter of government is because at least every 2, 4, or 6 years, they've got to stand before us and say, this is what we did and why we did it. Now, whether we elect them or re-elect them, that's on us. And I look at what's going on in our state houses and in our Capitol, and there's a lot of us who are falling down on the job. And why? It's because we're divided. We're defending. I just got to keep what I got. Just happy to have a job. Just want to keep mine. Instead of going, how do we make things better? And this has been my problem of getting to, how do we get things done? How do we make sure that we move to a greener, more just economy? How do we build an infrastructure that does the things that we need and creates the jobs that we have to have? Because all you're seeing right now, especially from the Republican Party at this moment, is no. Not doing anything. We're going to block, we're going to gridlock, we're going to delay. We're going to kick and scream. We're going to put our fingers in our ears and pound our feet on the ground like children. And while that's going on, the rest of us are either stagnant or falling behind. And then you wonder where the anger comes from. When people are hopeless, when they've got nothing to lose, bad things happen. It's that simple. Doesn't get any more difficult to figure out than that. There have been numerous studies throughout the years that have proven that when you give people hope and opportunity, not so much. You have an opportunity for good things. And think about your own life. When you go, hey, you know what? I'm going to do all right. I'm going to be able to pay my bills, might be able to put some money for vacation. I may get that little toy that I've wanted for a while. Yay! I'm going in the right direction. When everything's, my wife's leaving me, the kids hate me, the mortgage is late, they made my health insurance more expensive. What do you think? Sadly, too many people are on the track of things are going bad. We need visionary, transformational leadership, and I'm hoping Biden's that guy. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. Does it matter? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1989. That was the day Edna Sauls and 38 women walked into the Virginia headquarters of the Pittston Coal Group, sat down in the lobby, and sang "We Shall Not Be Moved." Their occupation lasted 36 hours. The women were mostly relatives and friends of the 1,700 union miners on strike against Pittston. The women, when questioned by police and the media, refused to give up their names. They called themselves the Daughters of Mother Jones. Though Sauls had never worked in the mines, 6 of her brothers and 2 of her sisters had. She and many family members would sit down in front of Moss 3 preparation plant just weeks later. As the strike wore on, her husband Doug would be one of the union strikers who took over and occupied Pittston's Moss 3 plant later that fall. Sauls noted the high personal stakes at Pittston, stating, "My husband is 42 years old. He's worked in the mines for 24 years. Who is going to hire him for another job?" Sauls also rose to local fame during the strike when she began writing strike solidarity songs. One such song was "Let Me In," also referred to as the camo song for the strikers who wore camouflage. Sauls composed the song after she found a child crying whose striking grandfather had been jailed. In the song, the child asks to go to jail too. The daughters picketed Pittston offices twice a week and organized strike support that included housing, food drives, and fundraising. Their role inspired miners to occupy the mines and roads, persevere throughout the winter, and eventually win back health benefits. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the more disgraceful things I saw over the weekend, and again, you go to Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, where again, another senseless shooting of an unarmed black man happened by a veteran policewoman who you would think would know better, would know the difference between a taser and a handgun. Again, this is just one of those bizarre moments, a video on Twitter of the American flag and a blue line flag that the police had kind of raised up. And, people were saying it's kind of like the Brooklyn Center police there in Minnesota, where that's like their Alamo. They've raised their flag. And you go, is this the right thing to do at this moment? I think not. Here to share some thoughts on where we are, I've asked our good friend Will Bunch to come back and talk with us. Will is a national columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's got a new piece out from Minnesota to Philadelphia. Troops flood the zone, violate our rights, and make us less safe. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Hey, thanks for having me.
So, did you see that? You saw this flag. You saw this being flying in the breeze. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that really inspired me to write this column, because I really couldn't put it any better than you just did. It is an Alamo type situation. I mean, I feel that this American way of policing, which is so imbued with systematic racism, that the thing that we've been talking about ever since George Floyd was killed 10 months ago. I feel like this police state is kind of making its last stand here, or not its last stand, because they might win, but I do feel like, I think a lot of people felt after the protests, after George Floyd was killed, that we could go in a couple different directions. We could maybe possibly see a radical reform of the police, probably not abolishing the police, but making it more public safety, making it more community oriented, setting up scenarios where when somebody's having a mental health crisis, they send a mental health worker and not an armed police officer. Same with these traffic stops, do what they're doing in Berkeley and a couple other cities where you have civilians making these traffic stops who aren't carrying guns and aren't, escalating the confrontation. I mean, that was one direction we could have gone, or we could go the direction that we seem to be going, which is the police and their unions. This officer who shot and killed Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center was also the head of the police union, and, to me, the fact that they raised this thin blue line flag over their station house said everything. And then ever since then, what have you seen on the ground there? I mean, you've seen these phalanxes of troops, behind this fence, firing projectiles at protesters. Every night, reporters have been roughed up. We have video of reporters being pepper sprayed. Reporters are being dragged out of their cars. A producer for CNN, who happened to be an Asian American woman, was arrested by a cop who screamed at her, "Do you speak English?" even though that's her primary language. I mean, and look, I'm not, even though I'm a journalist myself, I'm not one of those guys who only gets upset when it's journalists are being abused. But I think the bigger picture here, and why I do make a big deal when journalists get abused like this, is because if this is the way that the police are treating people wearing press vests or with press badges around their neck, imagine what they're doing to everyday citizens.
Exactly.
When there's not a camera present.
No, imagine, without all of this attention. This is what they're doing with the world's eye on them. Imagine what they do when nobody's paying attention. You're absolutely right.
Right. A guy's pointing a camera at them, and they're, putting them on the ground and roughing them up, or like I said, arresting a couple of these people. If they're doing that to the press, they're doing worse, and they are. I mean, there was a remarkable picture out of Brooklyn Center where there's a church near the scene of the protests where some of the protesters have been taking sanctuary. I mean, that's a tradition in this country. Churches are sanctuary,
Not
whether
just
it's
in this country, but globally.
well, yeah, right, yeah, not just a good point, but it's come up a lot in the whole immigration fight with undocumented immigrants taking sanctuary in these churches. Anyway, when protesters started using this church for a sanctuary, you saw this incredible scene of 75 heavily armed, RoboCops. I don't know what else to call them, forming a phalanx around this church so that people couldn't get in. I mean, that's the level of policing we're seeing here. And what scares me, Rick, with this verdict coming down, maybe midweek, maybe the weekend, who knows what's going to happen. But we're seeing in so many cities across the country that they are gearing up for kind of a armed occupation type scenario.
Yeah.
I know in Philadelphia where I am, they've already activated 1,000 National Guard officers for Philadelphia. I mean, this reminds me of that movie. If you remember that movie Minority Report, where they had the Department of Pre-Crime, they're calling up the National Guard for a case where the verdict hasn't come down yet.
Will, you got to go. If we've learned from the past, and from the past we've learned that these police officers get off, and there could be chaos. Because I've been struggling with this one myself.
Yeah,
if I'm Governor Wolf, am I derelict for not preparing for what could be the worst, and maybe doing it a softer way, or do I go out with the shock troops, with the tanks and all of that stuff? That's a tough call.
Yeah, it is. I no, and you're right. You're right, absolutely right. And actually, it's funny. I'm on the editorial board of the Inquirer with one or two other columnists and with the people who write the editorials. And we had our big weekly meeting today, and we talked about this for a long time, about what's our position about the National Guard. And it is a tough one because, you don't want to see, I don't think any of us really wants to see small business owners, especially a lot of these small business owners are Black and brown people themselves. I mean, we don't want to see them get hurt by, indiscriminate vandalism or looting or whatever. I mean, there's a need for some level of security. What I would say about that, though, is, I mean, here in Philadelphia, I can't speak so much for other cities, but I know in Philadelphia, we had a good run of about 6 or 7 years where they were really getting that balance right most of the time. And what they were doing was they had an active civil affairs unit that would respond to these protests. But they wouldn't show up in riot gear. They were mostly bicycle officers. They would show up in, regular uniforms, not the vests, not the helmets, not the batons. And they had a commander who was really good, and they tried to respect people's First Amendment rights. Obviously they enforced the law if necessary, but that system worked really well. I don't know if you remember the 2016 DNC that happened in Philadelphia.
I was there.
There were a lot of protests, as you know. Some of them had the potential to go bad, and they didn't because the police did a good job handling that. So it can be, it's a tightrope, but you can walk on that high wire. You can balance, protecting the property of law-abiding citizens, but also respecting people's First Amendment rights.
It's an excellent point that you make about the visual de-escalation. I think by having what you're expecting to be a riot, and you put these people, even I would think the people in them are ready to start cracking heads. So it's a completely different dynamic. I think you're spot on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sure you've heard, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard the chant at some of these protests when the people say, why are you wearing riot gear? We don't see no riot gear, is a chant that demonstrators use. And the thing is, people who've, been to or covered these type of events know that when police respond in riot gear, it's almost inviting a riot on some degree. And the thing, and you tell this, obviously as a journalist, I have to interact with, these conservative people responding to what I write all the time. And, they don't get it. You tell them that and they think you're crazy. But it's, people have studied this and it's true. The level of police response on some level determines how the public responds.
And I would argue that that's not just on the group scale. That's down to the individual. And I look at the murder of George Floyd. That could have gone completely differently from what the videos that we saw with people who are trained better in de-escalating that situation.
Right.
That should have never gotten to the point to where it got right from the start. And I would take that, you multiply that to crowd size. The same thing. It's all about de-escalating. It shouldn't be about you're going to do what I say one way or another. I demand because it turns out bad.
And the cities across the country. There have been some cities. I believe Los Angeles is one that gets held up as an example of where they've really put a heavy emphasis on this de-escalation training for officers, and they've seen some good results. My theory when it comes to police is. Honestly, I would like to see what they proposed in Minneapolis that they ended up not doing. I would like to see that tried in a few cities where you basically, you're not abolishing policing per se, but what you're doing is you're replacing the police as we know them with like a new kind of Department of Public Safety. And, where you're really doing serious community policing where you're hiring people from the community, they're living in the communities, they're not an occupying army.
Take their tanks away.
And you make these other changes that I mentioned a moment ago, where situations that don't require an armed intervention don't get an armed intervention. So how many, when you analyze these scenarios that go bad and end up in a police officer shooting an unarmed person, or these situations that go bad. The two leading causes that I see all the time in the worst cases are traffic stops and mental health crises when they respond, or drug overdoses, I guess, which is kind of a subset of mental health crises.
And those you're right, could be handled much differently. So let me ask you this, because one of the things that has to happen is we have to, I think, look differently at how we police. And I've said from the beginning, I support the police. I don't support defunding them. I don't support abolishing them. I support them when they're not wrong. When they do the right thing, I support them. But we've also got to use them in a different way, because here in Pennsylvania, back when they closed down the state mental health hospitals, basically law enforcement had to pick all of that up. And we've been using our jails as mental health facilities for way too long. So investing in that again, I think could be helpful.
And as you're suggesting, the police don't even want this role, right?
No.
It's just a bad situation, and it's bad. It's bad government. It's bad. It's bad policy. And when it comes to abolishing the police, right? If you live in a neighborhood and some people in your neighborhood get murdered, you want somebody investigating those crimes and finding out who did it, and whether we call them the police or whether we call them the Department of Public Safety. Obviously you need officers, with training to help keep the public safe on a certain level. It's just we need to get it right. For the last 40 years or so in this country, we've gone the occupying army approach too much, with these things like stop and frisk, for example, or these traffic stops that are pretexts, but by which I mean, when somebody gets pulled over because they have the tree air freshener dangling down from their front view mirror, and it's just an excuse for the cops to try and find guns or try and find, and they've studied this, and these stops are disproportionately of Black and brown drivers, even though the truth is that they actually find contraband more often among white drivers, but there's such a racial component to this. And these are the reforms we need to be taking. And it gets back and the reason I wrote about Brooklyn Center is because it's typical of what we're seeing, where we're, instead of trying these reforms, the police and their unions are raising their thin blue line flag and doing this kind of Fort Apache, the Bronx, last stand against these protesters. And it's really alarming as we go into the verdict in the Chauvin case.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that doesn't go the wrong way. Last question I've got for you, because we're talking about people and their First Amendment rights to protest and to seek redress of their grievances for their government. As we speak, there's anti-protest legislation banging around in a lot of states.
Yeah, I'm writing about this in my newsletter that goes out tomorrow about the bill that Ron DeSantis just signed in Florida. Which he calls an anti-riot bill. I mean, they basically want to try and redefine peaceful protests as a riot. And, and Florida is doing this thing that you've seen in some of these other red states where they want to make sure that if you drive your car into a group of protesters, that you can't be held liable. I mean, that's just outrageous, I mean, I don't know if you or any of your listeners have seen the legislation that's been proposed up in Minnesota, of all places. I mean, it probably won't become law because they do have a Democratic governor, thank God. But there's a proposal in Minnesota that if you're a college student and you get arrested for civil disobedience during a protest, they could take away your student loan if this bill passes. I mean, to me, that's just unbelievable. But that's where we're at. That's where the Republican Party, rather they've given up on policy ideas and they've given up on governing. And what they're trying to do basically is shut people up.
Yeah. Well, again, these are the same people who brought us your stand your ground laws, where if I start a fight with you and you beat me up, I get to shoot you.
So it's a trend. It's it's their philosophy, but it just doesn't jive with the First Amendment or the Constitution.
We definitely live in scary times. But Will, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the work that you do. Great stuff as always. Hope folks will take a look at the piece from Minnesota to Philly. Cops, troops, flood the zone, violate our rights, and make us less safe. Written by the great Will Bunch. We'll make sure we get links out on how you can check that out. Will, I appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff as always. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1857. That was the day that Clarence Darrow was born in Kinsman, Ohio. Darrow was perhaps the original U.S. labor lawyer. Known to be a friend to underdogs, Darrow once supposedly said, quote, "Lost causes are the only ones worth fighting for." Clarence learned his concern for his fellow man from his family. His childhood home was a stop on the Underground Railroad. In 1887, Clarence moved to Chicago to pursue his law career. But his first big client was not an underdog. In fact, he ended up working as the general counsel for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. But then the 1894 strike by Pullman workers led him to quit his job. And instead, he defended Eugene V. Debs, the president of the American Railway Union. Debs had been imprisoned for his support of the striking Pullman workers. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Although Darrow lost, his reputation as a lawyer for labor was sealed. Over the years, he would go on to successfully defend Big Bill Haywood, leader of the industrial workers of the world, when he was accused of murder. Darrow's most well-known case, however, was the Scopes trial. Darrow defended a high school teacher, John Scopes, who had the audacity to teach evolution to high school students in Tennessee, something that was quite controversial at the time. The trial became a major news event. 200 reporters from across the nation covered the case. Darrow won, which was seen as a major shift towards the teaching of science in the classroom. Clarence Darrow is still beloved in Chicago, which holds a ceremony each year remembering his work as a champion of the people. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you remember back during the former guy years, back when Scott Walker was still the governor in Wisconsin, and they had this grand deal. They were going to bring in this Foxconn manufacturer, the place in China where they have nets in the hallways because the working conditions are so bad that people were literally leaping to their deaths in the hallways. So instead of making conditions better, maybe paying a little better, maybe a little extra pudding in their lunch. No, just nets. I want to make sure we catch them, punish them, and then put them right back to work. Well, we were going to build one of those here, and it was supposed to be amazing. It was supposed to be huge, enormous. I think it was a $10 billion something or other. No, it was a $4 billion deal they were going to do. No, $10 billion plant. They were going to get $4 billion in state and local money, and it was going to create 13,000 jobs. It was going to make Wisconsin the flat screen panel TV capital of the world. Well, here we are a couple years afterwards, and I guess they're like 290 jobs, pared down that 13,000 number a whole bit. And with it, the tax breaks, but I guess there's a new deal. And here to share some thoughts on the new Foxconn deal, I've asked Robert Kraig to come talk with us. He's the executive director of Citizens Action of Wisconsin. Their website, citizenactionwi.org. Robert, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, it was great to be with you, Rick. I remember your time here in Wisconsin during the great public employee protests of 2011.
Yeah, at the beginning of the Walker era, and I'll tell you, I am so happy you guys got rid of him. And in here, another Walker bad deal. But I'm looking at this and I'm going, $10 billion plant was supposed to be built there. That hasn't happened.
Yeah, and it's even worse than the 13,000 jobs. I'm one of the people who was a glutton for punishment enough to sit through the 10-hour hearing, the only public hearing on it in the state legislature, to testify. And every business leader of the major business leaders in the state and the major educational leaders, everyone you can imagine, all came in succession, said how wonderful it was. And the business leaders said, no, with the multiplier, it's 35,000 jobs because of all the other jobs that the $13,000 would create. And this is the best deal they've ever seen. And when I was sitting there waiting to testify, sitting next to Stephanie Bloomingdale, the president of the state AFL-CIO here in Wisconsin, I was looking at research online, and we were paying $15 more per job than what is standard in these development deals. And that is not a high bar. These development deals all over the country are horrendous giveaways. They're not the best ways to spend money in order to create jobs and employment, especially not union jobs, right, as you well know, Rick. And so, I mean, if you do the multipliers on taking $4 billion of public money, investing just directly in education, in green jobs and climate, would produce many more jobs than even their promises, and it would have happened. So there was the money available. We tried to take the opportunity to say, well, Scott Walker all of a sudden says there is money once Foxconn asked for it. So why don't we invest this for real in the future of the state and build family supporting jobs, union jobs, to prevent climate genocide? And of course, no. And it's been worse than my testimony against it. And I was worked up enough that it went viral, the testimony I did. But, I understated it. And it's right, 289 jobs. They have empty storefront, like kind of headquarters all over the state. Those were put in the cities across the state during Scott Walker's reelect in order to try to bolster that this was going to help the whole state. And this was brokered not only by Scott Walker, but by Donald Trump. So this reflects both of their economic geniuses, which is shovel money out to big corporations, and you'll solve the problem. Now, the state's defense is, well, we didn't really have to do many of the tax credits. They haven't done anything. They haven't met any of the benchmarks. Well, all the infrastructure improvements that the state made with widening highways and creating roads, that was done. In addition, the Racine County and the village of Mount Pleasant, the community it's in outside of Racine, the city, is going to go bankrupt with what they had to do to enable this. They just went, they went in hock with huge amounts of TIF financing and other things that has to be paid back. And so, this has been horrendous disaster for an area that was just used to make things, used to be a big manufacturing center, global trade and deindustrialization and the free trade, corporate trade regime gutted Racine. And so they were desperate and went along, but now they're in hock to something that probably still won't happen at any real scale. And so I know there are a lot of back and forth and weird stories about Foxconn, but it's even worse than any of us predicted when this was launched upon the state with great fanfare, Rick.
But a lot of these conservative, constructs, like tax cuts create jobs, and all these myths that they throw around, the trickle down economic stuff. This was another one of those things that was sold to us as this is the way forward. If we give them all the money, they're smart, they'll know what they'll do to do with it, and they're going to take care of us. And again, we end up getting the short end of the bag. And I got to wonder how much money, is there any definitive amount that the state has lost that could have gone to education or to infrastructure or to anything else? I mean, we'll get to the deal, what little details we know in a minute, but how much since 2017 has been lost?
I mean, one can try to calculate the cost of the infrastructure, what the county and Mount Pleasant are going to lose, and that Racine County can't afford to lose it, is unknown because all that bonding hasn't come due yet, right?
Right.
But there's also a huge opportunity cost here in that what is the other economic development strategy for the state that could be making a green transition? But I remember when there was already signs they were behind when Scott Walker was being asked what's going on. He goes, well, Foxconn knows what it's doing. We don't know anything about flat screens. And so, I'm sure they have a plan and that they're brilliant and that's why they're in business. Well, they have a history, including with Pennsylvania, of claiming they're going to build something and never building it. And they've done that to a number of other countries. It is probable that they did all of this to please Donald Trump. And when Scott Walker lost, now Donald Trump is lost. They have no incentive to do anything real here. There are rumors about them doing electric cars. It doesn't, they have some deal with an electric car manufacturer. It doesn't seem to make sense. They said either this plant or Mexico. What do you think it becomes, Rick?
Mexico.
Yeah. But I don't have off the top of my head a number. But I can tell you this state and states and cities across the country continue to do smaller deals like this each and every day. This is what constitutes city economic development policy. National Public Radio says $80 billion a year is spent on these incentives, and they are not a good way to create jobs. And the best research from the major think tank in Michigan that actually tracks these things, even it says even the good ones are not the best use of the money and have doubtful returns. But this is what, in this whole era since Reagan, that included Clinton and Obama's economic policies, has come to mean economic development in this country. We need to get back to something that's a lot closer to New Deal planning model, where we invest and do and build what we need to do and employ American people to do it.
No, I'm right there with you. And this is one of the things that I've talked about for a while. We've got to stop relying on corporate America to bail us out. They're never going to do it. We've got to start employing people ourselves. I've often said that I would love to see us get rid of all welfare and handout programs and give people jobs. If the private sector can't or won't create enough, the public sector has to. And we take that money that we would have handed off to Foxconn or to Caterpillar or to whomever, and we use that money to put people to work directly to do the things that we need done, from building our infrastructure to taking care of our senior citizens. This is not a hard thing to figure out, that you need stuff done, you got to fund it.
Completely agree. And by the way, the agency handling the Scott Dunn deal is a privatized jobs agency. Walker privatized the whole sector in Wisconsin. I took it out of the Department of Commerce, created something called the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We have a very moderate Democrat governor. He didn't get rid of it at all or even campaign against it. And he has just a less outrageous corporate leader running it. And so it's secret what this deal is because it's stuck within WEDC. They're negotiating it, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And I don't have, I mean, I have more faith that it's a Democratic administration, that it won't be a total ripoff, but it's still a bunch of corporate types deciding what to do. And this is their whole mindset. So I don't have faith that this is going to be a very good deal, but even it is, we should pull the plug on Foxconn altogether. And since Racine really needs jobs and is really on the hook, let's actually do something public there and not rely on some exploitive global corporation that, you're right, who is so sadistic that their employees have to be prevented from committing suicide. Their jobs are such hell.
No, you're spot on. And again, it comes back to every bad, corporate idea, from the tax handouts to privatization. I mean, in my neighborhood, they're talking about privatizing a county nursing home, and everyone knows how that's going to turn out. You're going to turn out with higher, nurse to patient ratios, lower wages for the nurses, lower retirement security, less coverage for health insurance. It's going to be bad top to bottom, except for the guy who owns the place, who's going to fill his pockets with the assisted living money. Because we've seen this movie over and over, just as we've seen these bad deals like the one at Foxconn.
Now you can imagine, I don't like the model, that there are a lot of people who don't have good jobs who need them, a lot of Black and brown folks in Milwaukee and Racine that are proximate to this. Well, they weren't going to have a huge training program and try to do anything like that. Scott Walker was running ads in buses and L trains in Chicago looking for people. And you know what they did? They only chose the lines that went through the north side. That is the white knowledge worker part, Lincoln Park and all of that. And not any of the lines that went into the major African American or Latinx community. So we were just trying to go, not even employ Wisconsinites, but try to lure. And these ads were hilarious. They talked about how congested Chicago is and how you're on a bus and you could have your own ranch house and your own garage if you came up to Wisconsin and worked somewhere like Foxconn.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say with that. I mean, I remember it actually, and it's one of those things where you just go, where do you go with that?
If you're a young person, you live in this vibrant urban community with all these great restaurants and bars, you don't actually even want that suburban ranch house. It's like a terrible ad.
Yeah, I don't want to live in the middle, especially because it's even colder. But here again, back to this new deal. Do we know anything at this point? Anything at all?
We know it's going to be scaled down. We know that they're saying that they'll have more flexibility, whatever that means. We'll see what the standards are. Look, I even think, the state of the art, like whatever states and cities have the best of these deals, they're still not worth doing. It's a question of how bad they are. I can't imagine that WEDC, the way it's run, Wisconsin Development Corporation, is going to negotiate all that good a deal, or Foxconn would even, maybe Foxconn will sign a better deal. And what do you think the odds are they actually live up to this one?
There is that. What are the odds that they're going to live up to that?
Deal? Their shills have been saying they've been meeting all the standards all along and meeting their goals. It's hilarious. Reporters are like, "What goals? You've met none of them."
It's because they want the money, man. They want the money. But we'll see it when the numbers finally come out. I want to change the topic real quick. Over the weekend, another shooting in Kenosha. I'm looking at Wisconsin going, what's going on? Actually, what's going on across the country? Kenosha is almost the murder capital of the country. We just got all kinds of craziness going on.
Well, we do have, increased homicide rate because of COVID-19. And of course, that's the whole pandemic is made much worse by the right wing, by their attitudes on this, right? And that's our big hurdle. But we also have a structurally racist policing system. And even the cities that have tried to do the most have done precious little, despite what happened to George Floyd last year. We're in the, I guess the jury the jury has gone in to deliberate on that one. And there are so many structural barriers to this reform that it really is, in many ways, the most difficult thing we have to do in this country. Police do not make us safer, and we have to reconstruct our whole public safety system. I don't know if Rick, if your listeners know, horrendous things came out about Kenosha after the protests, after the shooting of Jacob Blake, where the sheriff's deputies were consorting with inviting in these white militia people, and they let the guy who shot 3 peaceful protesters, murdering 2 of them, who's become a right-wing celebrity, and they've been funding him and funding his defense, that they let him just waltz out of the city, all seen walking by multiple police cars holding his weapon, and he was apprehended much later in Lake County, Northern Illinois, on the Wisconsin border near his home. And so contrast that to the way Jacob Blake was treated, where he gets to be shot in the back 7 times, right? Because the police are trying to apprehend him. And he's leaning down with his back to them, right? So we see that over and over and over again. Can you imagine, our U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, who has become quite a national spectacle, says he wasn't afraid of the insurrectionists, but he would have been afraid if they were Black Lives Matter people, right? Which of course is thinly veiled. But furthermore, what people jumped all over that, reporters and the media. But what they didn't bring up is, of course, Black Lives Matter has never aspired to, or nothing they've done ever suggested they would lead an insurrection, ever take over the U.S. Capitol. So that's the even bigger lie. They're not similar in the least. But we have a problem that modern right-wing ideology, which has been fomented by plutocrats for their own purposes to destroy labor, to divide, it's become malignant to the point where it is proto-fascism is a polite thing to say about it.
Yeah, and I would argue that it all circles back to all of these bad conservative ideologies of handing money to these corporations through massive tax breaks and these bad deals, and all of the, enriching the wealthy at the expense of the rest of us, which has caused this tension in a big way, in my view.
Now, you remember what happened when Scott Walker thought he was talking to one of the Koch brothers during the 9/11 protest. Didn't he sound like he was their hireling? Yes, sir. Whatever you'd like, sir. Right?
Whatever you would like, sir.
You got to remember that the politicians are just hirelings. They're front people. They're not the real power here. The people we think are doing it from the right-wing political leaders.
Yep. No, it goes back to Jay Gould. I can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half, and we're seeing it sadly playing out in front of us. But Robert, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you, my friend. Keep up the great work there in Wisconsin.
Thank you very much, Rick. You keep up your great work. And the PROACT Mansion's a co-sponsor now, so I'm sure you'll be talking about that.
Yeah, let's get him to do something on the filibuster, and then we'll talk. Thanks so much, Robert. Robert Kraig, Executive Director of Citizens Action Wisconsin. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. This marks the day one of the most horrendous acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history occurred in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. A truck bomb exploded at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people. 99 of those killed worked for the federal government. 8 were federal law enforcement agents. Those who lost their lives worked for governmental agencies including the Secret Service, U.S. Customs, the Department of Agriculture, Drug Enforcement Administration, Department of Transportation, Army and Marine Corps Recruiting, U.S. Customs, the Social Security Administration, Housing and Urban Development, and the Federal Employee Credit Union. On that horrific day, 19 children were killed, including 15 who were at a daycare center in the building. The blast left 680 people injured and maimed. More than 300 neighboring buildings were damaged or destroyed, totaling more than $600 million in damages. In the rescue effort, more than 12,000 people participated to aid those injured in the blast and to help recover those who had died. One of the men responsible for the bombing was executed for his crime. The other received a life sentence in prison. Today, a national monument and museum honors those who died. More than 4.4 million visitors have paid their respects at the memorial. One of the prominent features of the memorial is the survivor tree. A more than 100-year-old American elm stood in the parking lot across from the building. It survived the blast, and although it lost most of its branches, the tree thrives to this day. An inscription on a wall around the tree reads, "The spirit of this city and this nation will not be defeated. Our deeply rooted faith sustains us."
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at laborhistoryin2.
No longer just a parlor game, Monopoly is what's for dinner. Practically every commodity and every step in producing our family's most essential consumer purchase is in the tight grip of 4 or fewer global conglomerates. 4 chemical giants control more than 2/3 of the world market for commercial seeds. Tyson Foods and 3 other meat packers control 60% of the U.S. poultry market, while just 3 global packers control 85% of U.S. beef market and 71% of the pork market. 4 multinational grain trading powers control 90% of all grain marketed in the world. 2 conglomerates control nearly half of the U.S. market for tractors and other farm machinery. The biggest buyers of farmland are multi-billion-dollar Wall Street speculators, jacking up per-acre prices beyond what family farmers, especially young people trying to get into farming, can pay. Indeed, the largest owner of U.S. agriculture land is super-rich tech mogul Bill Gates, who holds land in a dozen states that would amount to nearly a 400-square-mile farm, bigger than 4 Seattles, the sprawling metropolis where he lives. President Joe Biden has been a lifelong policy minimalist, but when running for president, he at least recognized the need to combat corporate power, promising, quote, to make sure farmers and producers have access to fair markets. Rhetoric aside, though, there is at this point no sense that he and his inside team grasp the structural enormity of what's at stake, nor have they come up with proposals to do the heavy lifting necessary to free America from the monopoly yoke. This is Jim Hightower saying, nonetheless, farm, labor, consumer, environmental, and other progressive advocates should move a broad, aggressive, anti-monopoly initiative to the top tier of our change agenda, because it can produce big, positive results for nearly every grassroots constituency. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So good news. As of today, every adult in the U.S., every adult now eligible to get the COVID-19 vaccine. That's right. The Biden administration has pushed forth. We're past, 100 million, past 200 million in the first 100 days now. Everyone eligible, and I think that's a really good thing. One thing I'm a little concerned about, I'm concerned about the whole team sport mentality of, I got mine, my team's, no, we got the vaccine, I don't care which one it is, going to get us to the other side. That is a good thing, because we've got to break this whole dependence on corporate America, and this it's bugging me. I'm here to share some thoughts on the stranglehold that Big Pharma has on our vaccines. I've asked Max Moran to come talk with us. Max is the research director for the personnel team at the Revolving Door Project, revolvingdoorproject.org, the website. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
So good news. I mean, everybody now eligible. Did you get your vaccine yet?
I did indeed. I got one of the very last Johnson & Johnsons before they put the temporary hold on it. So I just tweaked in under the radar last weekend.
I'm going to get my second one here in a couple of weeks, and then I get to the other side of it. I'm looking forward to that. And maybe we can get back to some bit of normalcy on the other side. But as of this so far, I'm pretty happy with where things are. I did want to get your thoughts though, because we've given so much money to these big companies. They're raking in profits, and globally raking in profits. There should be something done.
Yes, you hit on a lot of really important themes there in a very small amount of time. So first of all, it's true that, like you said, vaccines in the U.S. are now available to every adult, which is an enormous achievement, especially when you think about where we were back in January. But the fact is that normalcy for the rest of the world, especially for the global south, for countries that are still developing, is still right now a long way away for basically completely artificial reasons. So right now, basically, if nothing changes, the global south countries won't be able to get fully vaccinated until 2023 at the earliest. That is 2 years from now. And also, those numbers are assuming that COVID-19 doesn't mutate in that time since then, which we know, of course, this is a virus that changes very, very quickly. So there's a very good chance that it would actually, in that span of time, mutate into something that could overwhelm our current vaccines. Because basically, the more people are unvaccinated right now, the more opportunities COVID has to infect people, and which gives it more opportunities to mutate. And again, a lot of this is entirely rectifiable, entirely fixable right now if Joe Biden and a lot of other national leaders are just willing to stand up to Big Pharma. Because here's the issue, is that in every region of the world right now, there are factories that are just sitting there which are capable of producing the vaccines which people in America are getting right now, the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, and so on, the Moderna. You have factories in every part of the world that are capable of producing these things. They're not able to just because they don't have the legal rights to do so. We've basically given these pharma companies exclusive monopoly rights over all the different parts of the production process for building a vaccine, even though those vaccines were developed thanks to taxpayer dollars. Like the mRNA technology that enables the vaccines to exist, entirely funded by taxpayer dollars. So there's no reason that we've just given this over to a private corporation, and now it poses a very real, very dangerous threat.
I mean, this is one of those moments that you go back to, the polio vaccine. How much would have Jonas Salk have put in his pocket if he could have held the country hostage like this? Exactly.
You also look at for instance, the flu vaccine, which obviously, is produced every year, and it's produced through a global cooperation, a global consortium where people identify, what strains of the flu they think are going to be the ones that are coming around, and people openly share information, and as a result, you can get a flu vaccine every year. It's completely absurd that we have defaulted to this sort of corporate, this very profit-driven way of looking at things, where it's all about concealing your information and concealing how to even produce a vaccine once you have one. When we know that, again, that poses an enormous threat to literally everyone on Earth, even if you're like some psychopath who doesn't care if people in poorer countries can't get the vaccine. You should care, because if people in poorer countries can't get the vaccine, that means the vaccine might that means the virus, that is, rather, might mutate, and that could then pose a threat to you. And again, this is for entirely rectifiable, entirely fixable. We just have to give up get these companies to give up the rights, the patent rights, the trademarks, the copyrights, in order to produce the vaccine more worldwide, and just start sharing information. And that seems like it's the kind of thing which we should all want. We should want people to be able to coordinate and work together towards saving lives, quite literally. And it just requires being able to confront corporate power.
Isn't this something we can just take? I mean, we paid for it after all. No, I mean, it was our tax dollars. Because here's the problem I have then. They hold on to this. They make a lot of profit for their shareholders and their CEOs. But this thing mutates, and we're shut down for another year or two. And then I got to go back and get another vaccine. This seems like it could be really expensive.
Exactly. It is absurdly more expensive for the entire world in the long run. If we again privilege these property rights, these IP rights, over public health. It is insane how much more that is going to cost everyone. Now, if you're Big Pharma, you hear that and you say, oh, that's fantastic, because all of that extra money is going to be going into your pocket, because, again, for completely artificial reasons, if we don't do anything about it, Big Pharma companies now hold the exclusive right in order to manufacture these vaccines. But if you're literally anyone else on Earth, then you should immediately want to be listing these IP rights, to be sharing this information, so that we can hopefully someday actually beat this thing. and be able to really move on from this horrific global tragedy. As far as ways that the U.S. can actually do something about this, for one thing, there's a waiver called the TRIPS waiver at the World Trade Organization right now, which would do all of this, which would lift these IP restrictions basically. And there's also a part of the law called margin rights, which says, like you said, look, we paid for the damn things, we invented the damn things thanks to our tax dollars. We should be able to have some control over who actually gets this technology that we developed and then some private company patented.
Yep.
Those are the two elements. There's also something called Section 1498. But really what this all gets back to is just that, again, technology which saves lives and technologies which, again, we developed thanks to our tax dollars should really be in the public domain and in the public interest.
Now, for me, it shouldn't just stop here at this vaccine, because the reality is the argument is always made that they should be able to benefit because they took the risk. They made the investment to develop this. It's their research and development. But there was no risk in going after this vaccine.
Yep.
There was tons of capital to everybody go and do. And I would argue that most drugs that are manufactured and researched, it comes with a ton of taxpayer money, plus a ton of research that comes out of our universities.
Yep, you are entirely factually correct there. Especially for vaccines, Big Pharma basically never puts up the risk, puts up the money in order to produce a vaccine. Because, this tells you a lot about sort of the cynicism of the pharmaceutical industry, is that a vaccine is something you only have to buy once. Why would, Big Pharma want to be putting a lot of money into the research and development for something where you take it one time and then you never need it again, because then you're immune to that virus. Part of, again, what's so exciting from Big Pharma's perspective about COVID-19 is that it mutates so fast, which means that, even though you treat it through vaccines, theoretically, world populations are going to need more and more boosters, more and more re-upping, and so on, and that means that you get more and more bites at the apple. If you're the pharmaceutical company, you get people to have to pay you over and over and over again. But again, the actual research that went into the actual science and discovery that went into producing this vaccine, entirely publicly funded. mRNA technology was created basically exclusively, thanks to government grants. All that happened was just that a few companies were able to swoop in, get the patent rights to applying this technology toward COVID-19, and now we're stuck in this horrible situation.
It's crazy to me. But again, it's not surprising because it's what we do. It's what we allow to happen. And there are going to be those who are like, well, we developed it. It's ours. We should keep it. We should hoard it for ourselves, because we've become a very selfish nation. It's all about me, me, me. And without realizing that if we don't reach out to other countries and we don't help the poorer and developing countries, this thing could boomerang back and end up, I would argue, worse off. And we could still end up dead from this. Exactly.
Look, it's really pretty simple. If you want to beat COVID-19 anywhere in the world, you really do have to beat it everywhere in the world. Because, again, this thing mutates so fast. If you give it any opportunity to have a host, it is going to find some way to overwhelm your current vaccine. And, again, from Big Pharma's perspective, that's great. That means people need to get more boosters, which means they need to come in more, and you get more bites at the apple, more opportunities to profit. But, again, if you want the pandemic to really, truly be over within, this year, hopefully, here in the United States, then you need the pandemic to be over everywhere in the world.
Right.
And really, the primary thing that is standing in the way of that happening is just these completely artificial patent rights, these completely man-made intellectual property rights. Just get past that initial hurdle, and the rest of it is downhill.
Yeah, but isn't that the basis of our national identity? It is all about property rights. If some of our founding fathers had their rights, it wouldn't have been the pursuit of happiness. It'd have been the pursuit of property, and we wouldn't be having these problems because property's mine.
Well, that's what you would think is the basis of our national identity if you only listen to really bad Republican historians. I think that there are a lot of bases of American identity, and one of the virtues of this country, one of the things that has become a true virtue of this country is not only property, but also care for your fellow man, but also a belief in democracy, a belief in equality, a belief in, trying to make the world a better place than it was when you came into it. So I would urge you, if anyone, I don't think that any of your listeners most certainly would put property rights first and foremost as what makes us American. Well, I would say, look, what makes us American is a fluid thing, and we can choose to prioritize our better angels, and this is a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah, good point. Or we could just take all of the doses that the former guy's supporters aren't going to take and just give them away.
That is true. That is true. That is a thing that we can do. If we just get past our selfishness, our prioritization of ourselves, and also if we just expand our vision of what it means to actually care for our fellow man and to actually want to get past this damn pandemic, then a lot of policy options, a lot of possibilities become available. It just becomes a matter of how we're going to go about doing that.
Yeah, if you can get a vaccine for that, I'd love you to figure that one out.
If there was only a way to vaccinate against selfishness, the world would be a much better place.
Yeah, and hatred and racism and misogyny and all the other things that are ripping our country apart.
Damn right. Damn right.
Maybe Pfizer can get to work on that one. So I guess the last line of questioning then is, what do we do? I mean, I think most rational, thoughtful people would go, we should be, if we have the means to do this, if there's an ability to create this stuff as cheaply as possible, to get it in as many arms as willing to do it, we should be doing that for the good of ourselves. If we have to be radically self-interested for ourselves, but for the good of the planet, what do we do?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, first and foremost, what needs to happen is that the United States needs to support, this is a little technical, but the U.S. needs to support a waiver for essentially a thing called TRIPS. TRIPS is the main trade agreement related to intellectual property. TRIPS more or less says that the U.S.'s extremely intense IP regime applies around the world. But in theory, the world can waive TRIPS requirements for products, including COVID-19 vaccines. This has never been done before because the way that TRIPS is written, literally every member nation, every nation that's signed onto this trade agreement has to support the waiver for the waiver to happen. It's deliberately made as difficult as possible to actually do this. And right now, the U.S. and a bunch of other global north countries like the U.K. and so on are basically sort of stonewalling this effort that most of the rest of the world supports to waive these TRIPS requirements. So first and foremost, you got to tell Biden, you've got to tell your Congress members and everyone to support waiving the TRIPS requirement. Again, Biden just has to give the word from on high, and you can do that. A lot of senators, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, a lot of progressives have been very vocal in pushing on this in recent weeks, but that's the first and foremost, most important thing is we've got to get that TRIPS waiver. And
do we have a place of action for that?
Public Citizen has been leading a lot of really excellent work. Lori Wallach over there has been doing a lot of this front. We, Revolving Door Project, wrote a letter to several members of the Biden administration on that topic. Those would be Jeff Zients and Gina Raimondo, who we have reason to believe, at least, have been more on the Big Pharma end of things, especially given their personal histories. But I would definitely recommend looking up Public Citizen's work, Global Trade Watch's work on this topic. Also, Doctors Without Borders has been leading a lot of excellent work on this, or Médecins Sans Frontières, as they're known in French.
Good stuff.
Definitely check out them and check out their work. They can direct you about how to take action.
We will certainly get some links out. Lori Wallach's fantastic. She does great work over there at Public Citizen. But Max,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you taking some time for us, filling us in on this, and hopefully we can get some movement. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
As always, Max Moran, research director there of the personnel team at the Revolving Door Project. Make sure you check out their website, therevolvingdoorproject.org. Got it wrong at the beginning. It's therevolvingdoorproject.org. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1989. That was the day Edna Sauls and 38 women walked into the Virginia headquarters of the Pittston Coal Group, sat down in the lobby, and sang "We Shall Not Be Moved." Their occupation lasted 36 hours. The women were mostly relatives and friends of the 1,700 union miners on strike against Pittston. The women, when questioned by police and the media, refused to give up their names. They called themselves the Daughters of Mother Jones. Though Sauls had never worked in the mines, 6 of her brothers and 2 of her sisters had. She and many family members would sit down in front of Moss 3 preparation plant just weeks later. As the strike wore on, her husband Doug would be one of the union strikers who took over and occupied Pittston's Moss 3 plant later that fall. Sauls noted the high personal stakes at Pittston, stating, "My husband is 42 years old. He's worked in the mines for 24 years. Who is going to hire him for another job?" Sauls also rose to local fame during the strike when she began writing strike solidarity songs. One such song was "Let Me In," also referred to as the camo song for the strikers who wore camouflage. Sauls composed the song after she found a child crying whose striking grandfather had been jailed. In the song, the child asks to go to jail too. The daughters picketed Pittston offices twice a week and organized strike support that included housing, food drives, and fundraising. Their role inspired miners to occupy the mines and roads, persevere throughout the winter, and eventually win back health benefits.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I see Kamala Harris was in Greensboro, North Carolina today. Back in 2015, we did for the longtime listeners may remember, we did a civil rights tour where we went throughout the southern U.S. looking for labor's involvement in the civil rights movement. And Greensboro is one of the places we stopped because what you learn quickly about the civil rights era now is that it's a tourism thing. And I learned this as we went on this tour, that anywhere where we treated black people horribly in the 50s and prior, there's now a museum, and they're cashing in. And one of the places is the place that Kamala Harris was at today, the International Civil Rights Center and Museum there in Greensboro, which is fantastic. What it really was is it was an old Woolworth store, and for those who know the history, it's where the lunch counter happened, where 4 of the A&T North Carolina A&T students sat down and were had things thrown at them and were spit on, and just horrible stuff. And they have kept it and they've redone it to where it looked like back then. It probably looks nicer than it did back then. She got to sit at the counter. We didn't get to sit at the counter. We stood there, and it was a really powerful moment. And that was one of the places that was quite shocking. I mean, they had, in fact, I remember we went down into the basement and where the lunch counter was, and there was this big expansive area. And as we were, walking past, the curator came in, because we brought our kids with us, and the curator's like, you might want to let my assistant take your kids to the other side. And because I think my oldest was 12 at the time, 13, and my youngest was probably 6, 7. So he came by and took the kids and went through, and And on the other side of that wall where the lunch counter is, were all of these photographs of people who had been basically, burned at the stake, and just the worst, horrible photographs of what and with smiling white people around them. I mean, it's tragic isn't a strong enough word. And I remember just looking at this stuff, going, every person should see this in this country, of how we've treated people. And I saw that, and immediately my mind went to that moment. I think you need to have these places to remember. Not that things are all that. I shouldn't say that. Things are better, but not all that much better for most people there. I do remember seeing the whites only sign, which kind of I don't ever remember as a kid. But there it was. One thing the AP article got wrong, they called them the Greensboro Four. The local folks there, no, it's the A&T Four. So that's one of those things. Also, Harris, did head down to other museums in the area. In fact, went to Montgomery, Alabama. Another place that we went, to the Rosa Parks Museum, which was, again, if you want to learn anything about that incident, which, understand, the whole reason that we took the tour, the whole thing that got into my head, is because my oldest daughter came home from school, and you have that conversation. So, what'd you learn in school today? What'd you do? And it came down to, well, we learned about Rosa Parks. And I go, what'd you learn? She was tired. And it was just that kind of, she was tired. And, I said, what, we should investigate that. We should do a trip, and we should do a tour, because I had been wanting to do it. And, we went to these places, and the stuff that we learned was just incredible. For instance, on the Rosa Parks front, everyone thinks she sat in the front of the bus. She actually did not sit in the front of the bus. She sat in the front seat of the black section of the bus, which at the time, if the white section was full, the bus driver could get up and make people in the first couple rows of the back section get up and go even further to the back. But she wasn't in the front of the bus, which was another one of those things that, you go, wow, our history is a lot wrong. But it's an incredible, incredible museum there, and I highly suggest people take a look at all of them. But I go back to our treatment of people, the mob mentality. Something seriously wrong there. Something seriously wrong. And look, we're looking down the barrel of another potential tumultuous time. The jury today got the Chauvin case. I personally don't see him being convicted of the more serious crime, maybe second-degree manslaughter. Just because I think the defense made every case to give the jury an out. But we'll see. And as we talked earlier with Will Bunch, I don't know how you deal with what is going to come. If you are the governor or if you're a mayor, I don't know. I want people to have the right to express themselves. I want people to be able to protest, but you always have a handful of people who generally aren't even part of those protests causing trouble. And that's part of the problem. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back with our good friend Bob Ney. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The annual threat assessment describes an array of threats we are facing in the coming year.
U.S. Global Threat Assessment warns climate change is a clear and present danger.
Japan insists the water is safe.
Fukushima's radioactive water to be dumped into the ocean. Plus, to combat climate change, France moves to ban short flights.
How does that combat climate change? Don't tell me. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Ecological degradation and a changing climate will continue to fuel disease outbreaks, threaten food and water security, exacerbate political instability and humanitarian crises.
Okay, yeah, but other than that, why is climate change a problem? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I know you've got the global threat assessment, blah, blah, blah. I'm only interested in why banning short flights helps climate change, but I guess we'll get there at the very end.
Yes, we will.
That's what I thought.
In its latest Global Threat Assessment report, the U.S. intelligence community cautions that man-made climate change remains a looming and growing global threat to U.S. interests at home and abroad. In the first hearing in 2 years on the annual Global Threat Report, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines warned the Senate Intelligence Committee this week that global warming risks further destabilizing a world shaken by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and will drive migration.
Ecological degradation and a changing climate will continue to fuel disease outbreaks, threaten food and water security, exacerbate political instability and humanitarian crises. Warmer weather can generate direct, immediate impacts, for example, through more intense, frequent, and variable extreme weather events, in addition to driving conflicts over scarce natural resources. And the changing climate, conflict, and economic deprivation will drive vulnerable populations from their homes, heightening humanitarian needs and increasing the risk of political upheaval.
That sounds like a problem.
In other news, despite coronavirus shutdowns around the world, levels of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere rose in 2020. Methane racked up its highest year-over-year increase since records began in 1983. And that matters because methane traps much more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide on shorter timescales. Part of the surge is attributed to the massive build-out of natural gas infrastructure worldwide.
What's the other part?
The other part is from biological sources like wetlands and cattle.
Cow farts.
Yep.
I knew it.
Atmospheric CO2 levels have reached their highest point in 3.6 million years. The last time atmospheric CO2 levels were this high, sea level was 78 feet higher.
Yeah, I remember that.
The government of Japan this week announced that 2 years from now, it will intentionally discharge into the Pacific Ocean more than 300 million gallons of radioactively contaminated wastewater that has accumulated over the past decade since the meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, because it is running out of room to store it. Japan says the treated water is within safe levels, but critics warn that radioactive isotopes in the water could potentially contaminate the marine food chain.
And that is exactly how we got Godzilla. I'm just saying. What are you doing, Japan?
China's foreign minister challenged Japan's deputy prime minister that if the treated radioactive water is safe, then, quote, please drink it.
Oh, God.
Here in the U.S., President Biden's first budget has been sent to Congress, reflecting his spending priorities for fiscal year 2022, which include undoing much of the damage done by the Trump administration. Biden's budget seeks massive increases in funding for the Environmental Protection Agency and for clean energy innovation, research, and deployment, electrifying the federal vehicle fleet, environmental justice initiatives, and climate and weather science research.
It's the undoing.
More good news. The U.S. solar industry had a record year in 2020 despite the COVID-19 pandemic slowing down some projects. That's due mostly to solar's increasing cost competitiveness with fossil fuels.
2020 was the best year ever.
Finally, France is moving to cut more emissions and clean up air pollution. The French National Assembly voted to ban airline flights within France where there are alternatives that take less than 2.5 hours, like the country's high-speed train system.
So there'll be less flights, so there'll be less emissions from those flights.
Exactly.
But won't that mean people use more cars, which makes things worse?
No, they'll take the high-speed train system. And it's offering car owners an incentive to trade in their aging, polluting clunkers with a $3,000 incentive to use toward the purchase of an electric bike.
How much does an electric bike cost?
About $3,000.
Good deal. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide, even in France, on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Well, sad day. Former Vice President Walter Mondale passed away. He was 93 years old, credited with making the vice presidency, I guess, more relevant, is what the news has been saying. But President Jimmy Carter said today, I mourn the passing of my dear friend, Walter Mondale, who I consider the best vice president in our country's history. I only wish he would have done better when he ran for president. But he passed away today at 93. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day. Maybe a thought on Walter Mondale. I've got our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thank you, Rick.
So I got to be honest, I didn't realize that Walter Mondale was still alive until I found out he passed.
Right. Actually, I'm going to be real honest. I was in the same. I, like you, follow news, and I was in the same boat. I thought he was still. I thought he had passed.
Did you ever meet him? Did you ever have any dealings with him? Or was
No dealings. Saw him once at an event. I think it was one of the, some event I was at, but didn't meet him. Just saw him. He was a U.S. Senator, of course, from Minnesota. He lost to Ronald Reagan,
right?
Which was
badly.
He lost badly, and now I do remember the more modern news he made when Senator Wellstone died, and he was going to be, nominated for senator, but then he was defeated by Norm Coleman, Senator Norm Coleman. So yeah, he actually tried to make a comeback then, and that would have been about 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I actually remember that. So, but sad to hear of his passing. 93 years. That's a good run, right?
Yes, it's a good run. Just like President Carter has had, a very fascinating life, and President Carter is 90? Is he 98 or?
Yeah, I thought he was close to 100.
He's my dad's age, I think. I think he's 98.
Yeah, I mean he's not a young guy.
No, not at all.
Let's move to your neck of the woods. Evidently, one of the representatives there, Steve Stevers. I guess that's how you say his name, Stevers, right?
Stivers.
Stivers. All right. Well, he's leaving Congress. Going to take a cushy gig with the Chamber of Commerce.
The other congressman from Pat Teaberry, who actually shared Licking County with me. First it was Kasich and I, and then Teaberry and I. He left to go to the sort of like a business roundtable, big paying job. And now Stivers, who's up in Columbus too, where Teaberry also was a congressman, he's going to run the Ohio Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, time to cash in. Everyone's jumping ship, it seems.
Yep, they sure are. Yeah, he was. Stivers was a staffer. Started out actually as a staffer for Teaberry at one point in time, and he was in the military, and then he got into the Ohio Senate. But he'll have a job. A lot of them leave to go on to some type of cushy job.
You do your couple of years in government, do a couple of favors, you make your way into a cushy gig, and still my favorite one is Tobin, I think his name was Billy Tobin. He was congressman from Louisiana. Went on to be the head of Big Pharma.
Right. I knew Billy. Why am I'm having a senior moment. Billy Tozan.
Tozan, that's it.
He was from Louisiana. Tozan. He was pretty funny when I did the Help America Vote Act with Steny Hoyer. Tozan asked a question. We were in a caucus meeting, and he asked a question about the bill, and he said, by the way, he said, we got rid of our levers, for the elections. He said, we sold them to Mexico, and he said, Edwards is now president of Mexico. Edwin Edwards, who was governor of Louisiana. So everybody cracked up. He made a joke about, Louisiana system being corrupt.
Yeah, well, nothing is surprising there. I wanted to get your thoughts on Kevin McCarthy's threatening to bring action against Maxine Waters for her comments about the trial there and everything going on in Minnesota. Let's start with what she said. I mean, I don't think what she said was completely outrageous. Maybe a little inflammatory. That if it goes the wrong way, we've got to be more vocal, a little more confrontational. I don't know that that's threatening. Thoughts?
Well, I know Maxine quite well. Maxine Waters was my ranking member for the Housing Subcommittee, and so I was chairman. She was the ranking member. We worked, together constantly. I went to Los Angeles in her district and did, tours of her area. And we went. In fact, Maxine and I had the first hearing on in Louisiana after Katrina. Nobody had a hearing, and we went down and had a hearing together. So I know her quite well, and she's a fireball, and so I paid particular attention to this story. And knowing her as I do, I paid particular attention to exactly what she said. And she said, "We've got to stay on the street." She went to I think the little town was called Brooklyn.
Brooklyn Center.
Not New York, but Brooklyn, up near
Brooklyn Center, Minnesota.
Yes, where the trial is. And she said, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure they know that we mean business. So the part that he is taking is we've got to get more confrontational. And again, I read this clearly. I know Congresswoman Maxine Waters well, and he's trying to build this into something it is not. She's just simply said more confrontational. Now, if she had said we have to go after the police, we have to do damage, we have to riot, something like that, then that's a different world. But all she said was we've got to get more confrontational, which, you could stand and be vocal and be confrontational. You can argue. So I think this is a symptom, Rick, of what happens in Congress. Somebody says something out there, and it might be, considered outrageous, and then they start to go after them. You can't say this. We're going to censure you. And it just keeps going on. And it's probably going to keep going back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. So I think, again, I don't think he's going to be able to, McCarthy, take any action over these words that she's trying to start a riot.
Yeah. Now, the judge had some interesting words also today. And I look at this and I go, is it helpful? I'm glad the judge didn't declare a mistrial, because my first thought when I heard it brought up, I'm like, oh, this would really set things off if they declared a mistrial over that. I tried to find, I don't know, maybe you found an elaboration on what the judge said. I couldn't find, any more details except what I saw on Twitter, where he said, the defense could potentially use this for an appeal. Yeah, and that in itself is kind of inflammatory. But he also did say, look, there's not enough here for me to declare a mistrial, and
right.
We're going forward.
But I didn't understand how that fit into an appeal process of what she said.
Well,
I don't get it.
I don't either, because I'm not a lawyer. But there's part of me that goes, if the defense is arguing the jurors should have been sequestered so that they could get none of the news and none of the updates and none of the stuff that was going on, because you got to assume that the jurors went home and saw stuff and saw the riots saw the stuff over the weekend, and that I would think by her saying that if, and this is where my thinking goes, and you can disagree, that if they don't find him guilty, there's going to be riots. There's going to be bloodshed in the street, and it's going to be the jurors' fault for doing it.
Well, that's okay. I can see now where that goes to. Okay, that if he is acquitted, then again, I don't see where the Congresswoman said if he's acquitted, we're going to riot. But if he's acquitted, we got to stay on the street. Okay, I now see where potentially, which an attorney can use anything, where potentially an attorney might use that. But there's been a ton of other things said, I think, far more inflammatory than that.
Yeah, I think the video is far more inflammatory than that. I think the video of a cop with a guy on the guy's neck for 9.5 minutes, that's a lot more inflammatory.
Right.
So you have any thoughts? I mean, everyone's kind of putting their money down on if he's guilty, not guilty, which charge. Where do you find yourself?
Well, I think that he'll be found guilty. I think that the sentence may not be as, trying to second guess the judge, but I think the sentence may not be as steep as people would want.
Yeah, that's down. That's a riot down the road we've got to worry about.
Yeah, I think he'll be found guilty. I'm just not sure. I mean, in some people's minds, it's a 25-year thing, and 30, or I don't think it's going to be to that extent.
Yeah, I think he's going to get found guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree manslaughter.
Right.
But, we'll see what they come up with.
That could be 9 years, 10 years.
Yep. That and it would be something, but I still think there would be chaos.
Correct.
And not good.
I agree.
Let's move along. Evidently, the officer Brian Sicknick, the officer who died during the Capitol riots, evidently died of natural causes. Was just standing around and keeled over, had a couple of strokes. Natural causes is what they ruled this. I don't know how you can rule that natural causes. Just curious.
I mean, I was shocked because there was, talk about how he was hit with a fire extinguisher, and that's what we always had heard. And they're saying the autopsy, the medical examiner. Now, in the Washington Post, the medical examiner said the autopsy found no evidence that he had an allergic reaction to chemical irritants, which would have caused him to, potentially have a seizure in his throat. But it said that he suffered 2 strokes at the base of the brain, and it was caused by a clot. I'm surprised.
Yeah, 42 years old.
You have it and you die. I don't know. I find it hard to believe. I'm not saying that's not what he died from. I'm finding it very hard to believe in that situation with what was going on and the trauma and and everything else going on. I find it hard to believe that had that not been going on, he would have suffered a stroke at that moment and died had it been just a regular day.
Yeah, and
I find it hard to believe.
So now my mind goes to this place. The people who are doing what they're doing, they're spraying him with stuff. They're attacking him. Mm-hmm. Now they're off the hook, because he had a bubble that was going to burst. Did their actions not cause that bubble to burst? I mean, I'm starting to think, you walk from this.
Well, let's compare this to George Floyd. George Floyd did have a problem with his heart. There's no question about that. If the policeman had not kneeled on his neck that day, would he have all of a sudden died on the street? I doubt it.
Doubt it.
He would have died at some point in time in his life, but like everybody, but not at that moment. It's the same with this. Would he have just been walking in the Capitol on a regular day and died? I just have to believe, just like George Floyd, I would have to believe that it's the incidences that led up to causing that medical condition to occur all of a sudden into the arena of death.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And speaking of crazy, have you found the My Pillow guy? He started a new TV network.
No, I didn't know that.
I think it's Frank Speech. I don't know who Frank is, but frankspeech.org, I think it is, .com. Not doing well. On the first couple of days, they got spoofed into believing that Donald Trump was on the line for him, and it's not going well. I tried to log in, not much there. But he's trying. He's trying. He's also filed a $1.6 billion countersuit against Dominion voting systems, which should go well for him.
Right. You saw where he was pranked, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and the prank caller acted like they were Donald Trump calling him, and
yep.
And you look at this guy, and I mean, I saw him on TV. We all saw him on My Pillow, and I thought he was kind of eccentric, but he had a pillow. You got to give the guy credit. He develops this pillow that makes him a multi-millionaire. Then all of a sudden he gets in the middle of the chaos and aftermath of that election afterwards, and I thought, what's he doing in the middle of this?
Yep.
For what reason?
It goes to show that rich people aren't very. You got stupid rich people too.
Right. Exactly.
But he's not going to have that problem for very long. Because
right.
the right, they're going to sue him, and the way he's spending money on whatever Frank's speech is, again, whoever Frank is.
Right. Yeah, it will have no traction, especially in today's world. It just won't.
It's sad. And finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on the big meeting today, Joe Biden and a bipartisan group of lawmakers, Oval Office, infrastructure. Anything come out of it?
Well, I think it was a good meeting to have. And this would actually be the second meeting, and he talks to the group. I think again it's good for the president to do it. He's extending as much of an olive branch as he can do with them. Now it's made up of 5 Democrats. It had 4 Republicans and 1 independent. With it, right. And Mitt Romney was part of the group. Of course, he's one of the bigger names with it. And so I think it was a good thing to do. Right now, there's talk about where Senator Manchin's at on the corporate tax increase, which he would be for, I think, if I read right, taking it down 3 or 4%.
25%.
Right, down, like 3% from 28 to 25, which would cause the president to have to shave part of the bill. The bill's kind of divided into 4 parts. You and I have talked about that before. So, the White House will have to deal with that, and maybe they'll get a couple people out of the meeting.
Yeah,
you never know.
Look, you only had a handful of Republicans. It's not going to be enough to get you to 10. So I'm almost of the mindset of you go through these exercises, but you still got to go through and get this passed by whichever means necessary.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, on the president's part, he's genuinely having these meetings. There's 2 of them on this issue alone, and they're bipartisan. I think the president will be receptive as this process goes. He wants it done, by summer. But I think the president will be receptive to interaction with Republicans as this goes on. He might get some grief for that, possibly from the Democratic leadership in the Senate, but I think the president's right in doing it. Yep. If the Republicans then, as we know, may not want to cooperate, then the president has done his part. There's nothing more he can do. And then finally it's a decision remaining with 50 people in the Senate, and it has to happen. This is one that the president can't lose.
No, he can't lose this. So let me ask you this, because Manchin came out today, and I know I said last question, but Manchin came out today in favor of the PRO Act. He signed on to be a co-sponsor to the PRO Act, which I've been saying, if he doesn't do anything on the filibuster, was just an empty gesture. Is it possible to get something like the PRO Act attached to the infrastructure bill as it moves through budget reconciliation?
Well, I mean, it is. It's possible. I mean, that's a big deal. Manchin would back the PRO Act bill, to eliminate right-to-work laws. And that's, as we know, that is a major deal. That's major support that Manchin is giving to the unions. And, I mean, if I were in leadership and I were Senator Schumer, I would surely want to add something of that nature to the reconciliation bill, so he doesn't have to have the supermajority that you need, 60 votes. I would want to do that, so it might have some legs.
I hope so.
It would be a good one to add. Let's put it that way.
No, it would be fantastic. But can you do something like that through budget reconciliation?
Well, he can. I mean, he can if he adds it in there. Now it'll be argued obviously by the Republicans. It doesn't belong. It's extra material. But in my time there, I've seen many things in the Budget Reconciliation Act in the Senate. This would not be unusual to add something in there because it does have budgetary impacts, and that's all it has to have.
No, it definitely does. It means that you're going to get more people, and more money into people's pockets, and it's going to. I think it's going to have a major reverberation effect.
Back to the government.
Yep, I think it'd be a great thing, and
it would be big.
I'm glad he did it. I'm not bashing him today.
I was just going to say this will give him a bit of a reprieve since January on some of the other things that Senator Manchin has talked about that has not made the progressive side of the Democratic Party happy.
No, you're spot on. As always, Bob, I appreciate the time. Good stuff.
Thank you, Rick.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Seriously, if this gets through, this could have major ramifications for working people across the country. Because, like Bob said, it ends this idiotic construct of right to work. And I would love to have a right to work. I would love to propose an actual, true, honest right to work law that says you have a right to the job. You have a right to decent wages, a right to decent health care, a right to decent retirement security, a right to safe workplaces. An actual right that comes with actual work, so that the right to work would actually make sense. Instead of, well, we're going to make sure that you don't have the ability to negotiate or bargain, and we're going to put the government between you and your employer by saying you cannot, under the rule of law, agree to a contract. Because that's what it says. You cannot agree to certain things. And for my anti-government folks, you should be angry at that. Also on the infrastructure front, and I wanted to get, I didn't bring it up with Bob, but evidently there are 15 senators who are signing on to Mike Lee's commitment to stop all earmarks. And anybody who's listened longer than a couple of months knows that I'm a fan of earmarks. I think you need to bring home the bacon. That's how we get things done. And as long as they're transparent, as long as they're in public, as long as we don't have the backroom dealings that we've seen in the past, we need to have specific things for people's districts that they come to Washington and they bring back. That's how we build our infrastructure. That's how local communities get their needs met. I am a big fan of it. It's what we should have been doing all along, just in a much, much more transparent way. But all quote unquote conservatives. You got Cronin from Texas, McConnell, the minority leader, Josh Hawley, Joni Ernst, Ben Sass, and Rand Paul, because he throws his name into anything that's horrible. So there you go. I'm looking forward to this infrastructure plan. I think this is going to be a good thing. They're just going to have to get this. They have to get it done. And by having these conversations with Romney and the gang of, hey, let's scale that $2.2 trillion bill down to $600 billion, that ain't going to cut it. We need big, we need chunky, we need transformational, we need visionary. We need to make massive changes. Because look, as we come out of this pandemic, people are going to need jobs, and lots of them. And this kind of investment could bring that kind of much needed employment. And you add that into a scenario where they're good union wage jobs, where they're paying prevailing wage, that is going to be a good thing. Just my thought. I'd love to hear yours, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. Going to be an interesting interesting week as we tick down to the Chauvin decision. What's the jury going to decide? I'm hoping it'll be like an hour. They come back guilty. All counts. But we'll see how long this takes. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.